That afternoon, the house was unusually still, a rare break from the usual whirlwind of our family life. I had decided to take the day off work as a surprise for Jessica and the kids, hoping to spend some quality time together that was long overdue. They were my everything, the reason I put in the grueling hours and carried the weight of a demanding job. But as soon as I stepped inside, something made me freeze in place. Voices. Jessica's voice drifted from the living room, speaking to the kids. It wasn't the cheerful, playful tone I was used to. Instead, it was quiet, tense, like she was making sure no one else could hear. My curiosity spiked. I set my keys down on the counter as silently as I could and made my way toward the hallway that led to the living room. The carpet muffled my steps, allowing me to inch closer without being noticed. Her words gradually came into focus, and what I overheard felt like a sledgehammer to my chest. "He doesn't need to know he's not your real dad," Jessica said, her voice low but unmistakably clear. I froze in place. Every instinct told me to stop listening, to turn around and walk away, but I couldn't. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as she continued. "Not until you've finished college, at least. He'll keep taking care of us until then. No point in upsetting him now, okay?" I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it had caved in, and I had to grip the wall to keep from collapsing. Her words were spinning in my head, refusing to make sense. My kids weren't mine. Desperate for some kind of explanation, I stayed, hoping there was some logical context that could make this all a misunderstanding. But then came the words that crushed any lingering hope. "Just remember," she said, her tone soft but unwavering, "this is our little secret. He's been a good provider, and we don't want to mess that up." A good provider. The phrase echoed in my mind, a cruel and mocking refrain. Was that all I had ever been to her? Just a paycheck? My heart pounded so loudly in my ears that it drowned out everything else. Memories came rushing back, moments I had once cherished. The love I thought I saw in her eyes. The pride I felt when I held my children for the first time. The family trips where I believed we were so happy. All of it. Lies. I stumbled back to the kitchen, barely aware of my own movements. My breaths were shallow and ragged, and my vision blurred with a mix of anger and despair. I couldn't stay there another second. My body moved on autopilot as I grabbed a duffel bag from the laundry room and started stuffing it with clothes, my hands trembling with every motion. My thoughts raced wildly, trying to grasp the enormity of what I had just learned. How long had this been going on? Had she planned this from the start? And the kids, did they know? Were they in on this charade? I didn't want to believe it, but doubt was already creeping in, twisting every memory I had into something grotesque and unrecognizable. I stopped, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved with a mixture of rage and sorrow. And then, a fierce resolve took hold of me. If Jessica thought I was going to keep playing the fool, she was wrong. Confronting her right then and there wasn't an option, not yet. I needed to be methodical, to think this through. She had built a web of lies, and I was going to tear it apart piece by piece. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. As I drove away from the house, it felt like I was escaping a building that was collapsing around me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached, and Jessica's words replayed in my mind over and over. This wasn't just about the betrayal I'd overheard. It was the realization that the life I'd worked so hard to build was unraveling before my eyes. Everything I had held dear was now drenched in deceit. Jessica and I had met almost 15 years ago at a wedding for a mutual friend. I still remember the way she looked in that emerald green dress, the fabric catching the light every time she moved. She laughed easily, her smile radiant, and from the moment we introduced ourselves, I was captivated. She had this way of making me feel like I was the center of her universe, hanging on to every word I said as if it were the most fascinating thing she'd ever heard. 2 years later, we were married. The ceremony wasn't extravagant, but it was beautiful, at least, I thought so back then. I can still recall the vows I poured my soul into, promising to protect her, cherish her, and love her for the rest of my life. Jessica's vows had felt just as sincere as mine, at least, that's what I believed at the time. Standing there that day, I truly thought I was the luckiest man alive. Our firstborn, Lucas, arrived a year later, with Ava following 2 years after that. I still remember holding Lucas for the first time, tears rolling freely down my face as I whispered quiet promises, to protect him, to always stand by his side. I was there for it all, late-night feedings, every stumble and scrape, and every school play. I can still picture Lucas wobbling on his bike as I ran alongside him, and the triumphant moment Ava finally let go of my hand at the deep end of the pool. My entire world revolved around those kids. I worked myself to the bone to provide for them, waking up before the sun and staying late after everyone else had gone home. Weekends blurred into workdays, but it didn't matter. I wanted Jessica and the kids to have the life they deserved, everything they needed, everything they wanted. Jessica had always dreamed of a big, colonial-style home, and I made sure she got it. 2 stories, white with black shutters, the kind of house you see in magazines. She stayed home to raise the kids, and often, she'd thank me for all the sacrifices I made. She said she was grateful for the life I'd given them. I believed her. But now, that gratitude felt hollow, and I couldn't stop wondering, had any of it been real? The more I thought about it, the more cracks I began to notice. Looking back, the signs had been there all along, but I'd ignored them. Little things. Jessica had always brushed off questions about her life before we met, dismissing it as unimportant. There were times at parties when I'd catch whispers or jokes, but I waved them away, trusting her without a second thought. I pulled into a motel parking lot and sat there for a long while, staring blankly at the dashboard. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with Jessica's name. It looked so harmless, just another call from my wife. But my gut twisted into knots. I let it ring. When it stopped, I powered down the phone altogether. She didn't deserve answers, at least not yet. I'd confront her when I was ready, on my own terms. The next morning, I sat across from Donna, my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who didn't mince words. I laid everything out, from the conversation I'd overheard to the creeping doubt that poisoned every memory I had of the last few years. As she listened, her expression hardened. "You've been used." "Plain and simple," Donna said, matter-of-factly. "If the kids aren't biologically yours, that's paternity fraud. We can take action, but we'll need proof." She walked me through the process. DNA testing, filing for divorce, removing Jessica from the house, and cutting her off financially. It felt like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb, but each step she outlined steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming my life from someone who had quietly stolen it right out from under me. That evening, I returned to the house under the pretense of grabbing a few personal items. Jessica met me at the door, her expression calm but unreadable. I could hear the kids upstairs, their laughter echoing faintly down the hall. I forced myself to stay composed. No confrontations, not yet. "Hey," she greeted me, sliding her arms around my neck. Her touch felt wrong, like cold hands brushing over bare skin. "How was work?" she asked softly. "Long day," I said, stepping back casually. "I just need to grab some things from the study." In the study, I rummaged through the desk until I found an old envelope tucked at the very back. Inside was Jessica's hairbrush, still tangled with strands of her hair. Quietly, I grabbed a baseball cap from Lucas's room and one of Ava's hair ties from the bathroom. Evidence. DNA tests required samples, and I wasn't leaving empty-handed. As I made my way back to the front door, Jessica's eyes followed me with growing suspicion. "You've been acting weird," she said, watching me carefully. "Is something wrong?" I forced a small smile, hoping it looked natural. Just tired, I replied, reaching for the doorknob. I'll be back later. As I drove off, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Jessica. We need to talk. The sheer audacity of those 4 words sent a surge of anger through me. Talk. After everything she'd done. The lies, the betrayal, the theft of the life I thought I had. She had no idea. But she would. I clenched my jaw, knuckles whitening as I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, heading straight to the lab to drop off the samples. 2 weeks crawled by, each day stretching longer than the last. When the results finally arrived, they confirmed what I had feared, what I had somehow already known deep down. Neither Lucas nor Ava was biologically mine. The weight of that realization hit like a freight train, but it didn't knock me down. I had braced for this. That night, I picked up the phone and dialed Jessica. My voice came out cold and unfamiliar, even to my own ears. We're done, I told her flatly. My lawyer will be in touch. Her reaction was instant, dripping with venom. You can't just walk away like this. We're a family, she screamed, the desperation in her voice cutting through the line. I let out a slow breath, steady and controlled. They're not my children, I replied calmly. And I'll make damn sure you don't get another cent from me. Jessica's voice exploded into a furious shriek, something indecipherable, but I didn't stick around to decode it. I ended the call, my hand trembling as I set the phone down. But there was no turning back. In the weeks that followed, the house was set to be mine alone. Jessica and the kids, though it hurt to think of them that way, would be evicted. I had done everything a husband and father was supposed to do, and this was how I was repaid. But this time, I wasn't going to roll over. I would fight. Anger burned beneath the surface, but more than that, I felt driven. Jessica had played me like a fool, used me as a pawn in her twisted little game. Now, I was going to reduce the entire board to ashes. She thought she could use me and walk away clean, but she had no idea just how far I was willing to go when backed into a corner. Step 1, evict her. I instructed Donna to fast-track the legal filings. The house was mine, bought with my money, and Jessica's name wasn't on the deed. The kids, painful as it was to admit, weren't mine, and any court would see her deception for what it was. Donna reassured me that I had a strong case to not only remove them from the house but also to pursue paternity fraud and damages. Jessica thought she was clever, but she hadn't anticipated me pushing back this hard. Next came the financial reckoning. I froze every joint account, cancelled every shared credit card, and revoked her access to anything linked to me. I had covered all the expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, the kids' tuition, their clothes. Jessica had never had to lift a finger when it came to finances. That was about to change. The spa days, the boutique shopping trips, the cushy lifestyle she'd grown comfortable with, gone. I made sure I was there when the eviction notice was hand-delivered. Sitting in my car parked across the street, I watched as Jessica opened the door to the process server. Her face twisted, contorting from shock to pure fury as she skimmed the papers. The moment she spotted me, she stormed down the driveway, yelling loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "You can't do this, you bastard," she screamed, slamming her palms against my window. I rolled it down just enough to meet her eyes, keeping my expression stone cold. "Watch me," I said icily. "You played me for a fool, Jessica. Now, you get to live with the consequences." Her fists pounded on the glass, rage painting her face red. "You think you're hurting me? You're tearing your family apart." I let the words hang for a beat before responding, my voice low and firm. "No, Jessica. You destroyed this family the moment you lied to me about those kids. Don't act like this is on me. You did this. Now clean up your mess." Before she could spew another word, I hit the gas, her shouting fading behind me. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Jessica had built her world around appearances, PTA meetings, book clubs, yoga classes. She thrived on the admiration and envy of other moms, the polished image of the perfect wife and mother. It was her armor. So, I made sure to crack it wide open. Anonymous letters found their way to the key figures in her little social bubble. I didn't embellish or exaggerate, I simply laid out the facts, cold and brutal. I detailed how Jessica had kept me in the dark for over a decade, passing off another man's children as mine, using me as a financial safety net while spinning her web of lies. I let them know she had planned to keep the charade going until Lucas and Ava were grown, leaving me to unknowingly foot the bill. The fallout was immediate. Friends drifted away, their conversations turning into hushed whispers the moment Jessica entered the room. Her carefully curated image cracked, and no amount of damage control could stop the wildfire of gossip that followed. Her world was crumbling, just like mine had. By the end of the week, Jessica had become an outcast. The woman who once thrived as the center of attention at every gathering was now shunned, her reputation crumbling faster than she could salvage it. The lawsuit was the final blow. Donna moved swiftly, filing a paternity fraud claim that sought damages for emotional anguish, financial exploitation, and the deliberate deception Jessica had orchestrated over the years. Sure, the money was part of it, but more than that, it was about making a statement. She had used me, lied to me, and now she would answer for it in front of a judge. Jessica didn't just roll over, though. She lawyered up and tried to paint me as some vindictive, spiteful man who had turned his back on his family. Her attorney leaned hard on the narrative of abandonment, calling me heartless for leaving the kids. But the DNA results left no room for interpretation. And Jessica's own words, her confession to Lucas and Ava, sealed her fate. I had recorded the conversation that day, the one that shattered my world. When that audio clip played in the courtroom, Jessica's face drained of color. There was nothing left to argue. The judge ruled in my favor. Jessica was ordered to pay restitution, a staggering amount she'd be clawing her way out of for years, assuming she could find decent work to cover it. When the gavel struck, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. Justice, even if it was just a sliver. One evening, not long after I settled into my new apartment, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, Lucas stood there, shuffling nervously from foot to foot. In his hands, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper like it weighed him down. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, but then stepped aside, nodding him through. Lucas entered slowly, his eyes scanning the nearly empty apartment. He looked older somehow, like the events of the past few weeks had forced him to grow up faster than any kid should. I found this in Mom's room," he said, offering me the paper. I took it, recognizing Jessica's handwriting the moment my eyes landed on the page. It was a letter. Short, but packed with more lies than I could stomach. "Jason. I'm sorry for everything. I never wanted this to hurt you, but I had no choice. You were never going to step up, and I couldn't do it on my own. I had to make sure the kids were taken care of, even if it meant lying to everyone, including him. Please don't contact me again. It's too dangerous. He's starting to suspect something, and I can't risk losing everything I've built. Jason." A name I didn't recognize, but it hit like ice water down my spine. I stared at the paper, the words burning into my memory. "Do you know who Jason is?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Lucas shook his head. "No, but Mom always got weird when she mentioned him. I think he's our real dad." My jaw clenched hard enough to ache. Another man. Another betrayal. The thought of Jason lurking somewhere in the background, watching my life from the shadows, made my blood boil. "Thanks for bringing this to me," I said, placing the letter on the table. Lucas nodded, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. I swear." I rested a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. I believe you. But beneath the calm exterior, my anger was reigniting like a wildfire. Jason. Whoever he was, he wouldn't stay hidden much longer. If Jessica thought she could keep him safe from the fallout, she was dead wrong. This wasn't just about her anymore. Jason was next. Lucas's revelation left me spinning, the name Jason echoing in my head alongside Jessica's betrayal. Who was this man, and why had Jessica chosen him over honesty? What role had he played in the elaborate lies she built around me? The anger I felt earlier began to shift. I wasn't just furious. I needed answers, desperately. The past suddenly felt like a different story, one I had skimmed through too quickly to notice the fine print. Now, I was going back and rereading every chapter, searching for clues I had missed. Jessica had always worn a mask. To the world, she was the model wife, the nurturing mother, the devoted partner. But beneath that polished surface was something far more sinister, a woman who had carefully crafted an illusion for over a decade. And I was beginning to realize just how deep the deception ran. I used to watch Jessica at Lucas's soccer games, her cheers always louder than the rest of the parents. She'd sit in the front row at Ava's piano recitals, mouthing words of encouragement, and I thought every bit of it was genuine. But as I sifted through the memories now, the cracks in her performance were impossible to ignore. There were moments when her enthusiasm felt hollow, when her smile flickered for just a second too long. Her attention would drift, her eyes locked on a phone screen that buzzed far too often. When I'd ask who it was, she'd dismiss it as nothing important. Then there were the unplanned errands, odd trips that pulled her away for hours at a time, with little explanation. Lucas, the boy I thought was my firstborn, had inherited Jessica's sharp wit. He was curious, always asking questions about the world around him. And Ava, my little girl, had been my shadow since she could walk. She'd follow me everywhere, her small hand slipping easily into mine whenever I stood still long enough. Those were the moments that kept me going, that made the long hours at work feel worth it. But now, I couldn't stop wondering, had Jessica ever told them the truth about Jason? Did they know the reality behind their lives, or were they just as blind as I had been? The letter from Jason felt like a key, one I couldn't stop turning over in my hands. I must have read it a dozen times, scouring every word for something, anything, that could lead me to him. Jessica's handwriting was unmistakable, but it was the tone that stood out the most. Desperation. Fear. I had no choice, she had written. No choice but to lie to me for more than 10 years. No choice but to build an entire life on deception and manipulation. The more I thought about it, the clearer Jessica's motivations became. She had married me because I was steady. Predictable. I wasn't the kind of guy who swept her off her feet in a whirlwind romance. I was the one who stuck around, the one she could count on. And she used that against me. I hired a private investigator to start digging. I needed answers, real answers, not just scraps of a story Jessica would twist to her advantage. It didn't take long for the investigator to uncover the truth. Jessica had been involved with Jason just before she and I started dating. Their relationship was rocky, volatile, even, and ended shortly before she met me. Jason wasn't just some random fling. He was a drifter, a charming but unreliable man who never stayed in one place for long. Jessica, it seemed, had been obsessed with him. But when she found out she was pregnant with Lucas, Jason vanished. He had no interest in fatherhood or commitment. That's when I entered the picture. I was the fallback. The stability Jessica needed after Jason ran. She didn't marry me because she loved me, she married me because I was the safe option, the man who could raise the child Jason left behind. And when Ava was born, fathered by Jason once again, Jessica kept the lie going. She hadn't just misled me. She had carefully, methodically, built a life on deception, turning me into the provider she needed while keeping Jason in the shadows. The next time I saw Jessica, it wasn't by chance. I showed up at the house without warning. My lawyer had already filed the eviction notice, and the locks were scheduled to be changed in a few days. I wanted to make sure she knew why everything was unraveling around her. Jessica answered the door in sweatpants, her hair thrown into a loose bun. She looked worn down, the stress of the last few weeks etched into her face. "Good. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cautious. I didn't wait for an invitation. I stepped inside, the door closing behind me. The house was empty. Lucas and Ava were probably still at school. It was just the two of us now. Without a word, I pulled Jason's letter from my pocket and held it up between us. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my tone like ice. Jessica's face lost all color. She reached for the letter instinctively, but I pulled it back before her fingers could touch it. "Don't bother denying it," I said sharply. "I know everything, about Jason, the kids, and the lie you've been spinning for over a decade." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in years, Jessica looked genuinely afraid. Jessica sank onto the couch, her hands trembling as she tried to find the right words. "I can explain," she began softly, but I wasn't in the mood to listen. "Explain." I cut in, crossing my arms as I glared at her. "Oh, I can't wait to hear this one." My voice dripped with sarcasm. "Go ahead. Explain to me how you looked me in the eye every single day for 14 years and lied straight to my face. Explain how you let me pour everything I had, my heart, my soul, into kids who aren't even mine. And while you're at it, explain why you thought I'd never find out." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. Not an ounce of pity. Not a flicker of sympathy. Just cold, unrelenting anger. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There it is again," I said, laughing bitterly. "That line. I didn't have a choice. What does that even mean, Jessica? You had plenty of choices. You chose to lie. You chose to marry me under false pretenses. You chose to keep me in the dark. Don't you dare stand there and pretend this wasn't your decision." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she buried her face in her hands. "Jason wasn't," she paused, struggling for words. "He wasn't the kind of man who could take care of us," she choked out between sobs. "When I found out I was pregnant with Lucas, he wanted nothing to do with it. And when Ava came along, he disappeared again. I was scared, okay? I didn't know what else to do." I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a lead blanket. "So you used me," I said, my voice flat. "You turned me into your backup plan." "It wasn't like that," she cried, shaking her head furiously. "I cared about you. I really did. But I needed someone who could be there for them, someone who would love them and give them the kind of life Jason never could." I exhaled slowly, disgust simmering beneath the surface. "No, Jessica. You didn't care about me. You cared about what I could give you." I met her gaze, unflinching. "And now, you're going to lose everything." Uncovering Jason. Later that week, the investigator came through with more information on Jason. Turns out, he had resurfaced not too far from here, living in a neighboring city, scraping by with dead-end jobs and piling up debts. He had a long list of broken relationships behind him and a reputation for causing trouble. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't want closure. This wasn't about some dramatic confrontation to make peace with the past. I wanted him to know exactly what kind of mess he'd left behind, and to make damn sure he stayed out of my life for good. Jason had been part of this wreckage, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. Finding him wasn't difficult. The investigator tracked him to a dingy bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where broken men drown their regrets one glass at a time. I parked outside and sat for a minute, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I steadied myself. The letter Jessica had written burned in my pocket, and my pulse thudded loud enough to drown out the hum of the engine. Inside, the bar reeked of stale beer and desperation. The dim overhead lights barely cut through the haze of cigarette smoke, but spotting him wasn't hard. Jason sat slouched at the end of the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey. He looked exactly how I imagined, scruffy beard, unkempt hair, and a wrinkled shirt that hung loose over his slouched frame. I walked up slowly, each step echoing on the sticky floor beneath my boots. "Jason," I said, my voice even but firm. He glanced up, his bloodshot eyes narrowing as he took me in. "Yeah. Who's asking?" I didn't bother with introductions. I pulled the letter from my pocket and slapped it down on the bar in front of him. His eyes flicked to the paper, and I saw the flicker of recognition almost immediately. His expression shifted, confusion first, then annoyance. "Jessica," he muttered, shaking his head as he reached for the letter. "What the hell does she want now?" "I'm not Jessica," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm her husband, or at least I used to be." Jason's eyes snapped back to mine, and for a brief moment, we just stared at each other, the silence heavy. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Finally, he leaned back against the bar stool, folding his arms. "Look," he said, sighing. "If you've got a problem with her, that's between you two. I'm not getting involved." I laughed under my breath, but there was nothing funny about it. "Not your problem. You're the biological father of her kids, Jason. You don't think that's your business?" I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "You're the reason I spent 14 years raising children that aren't mine. You're the reason she lied, used me, and ripped my life apart." Jason's expression hardened, but I saw no remorse. No guilt. Just indifference. "She made her choices," he said flatly. "I didn't ask her to drag you into this." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, but I didn't let the anger spill over. "No, Jason. You just left her to deal with the mess you made. And guess what? I was the one who cleaned it up. I didn't ask her to drag you into it." "Didn't ask?" I shot back, my voice rising, the anger cutting through the stale bar air. "You abandoned her. Twice. You left her with nothing but excuses, and I was the one who had to step in and pick up the pieces. You may not have asked her to lie, Jason, but you sure as hell made it easy for her." He shrugged, lazily raising his glass to his lips. "What do you want from me? An apology?" He smirked faintly, though there was no humor behind it. "Fine. I'm sorry. But from where I'm sitting, it sounds like your problem's with her, not me." My fists clenched, and for a brief moment, I wanted nothing more than to knock that smug expression off his face. But I swallowed the rage, forcing it down. This wasn't about breaking him, it was about making sure he understood the wreckage he'd left behind. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a harsh whisper. "You think this is over? You think you can keep hiding at the bottom of a bottle and it'll all just disappear?" I let the words hang between us for a second. "You've got 2 kids out there, Jason. They might not be mine by blood, but they sure as hell aren't yours either. Not anymore. You're nothing but a ghost to them. And if you ever try to come back into their lives, I'll make damn sure they know exactly what kind of man you are." His eyes flickered, something between anger and shame flashing across his face. But he didn't argue. He just sat there, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Whatever, man. Do what you want," he muttered, draining the last of his drink. I straightened, shaking my head. "You're pathetic," I said, stepping back. "And I'm done wasting my breath on you." The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the broken pieces of my life slowly began to shift into place. Jessica moved out of the house, her carefully curated world crumbling around her. The woman who once held her head high at every school event and neighborhood barbecue now walked with her shoulders hunched, avoiding the gazes of those she once called friends. The court ruled that I had no legal obligation to Lucas or Ava. I understood the logic, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Walking away from them felt like cutting off a part of myself. They had been my world, my reason for every sacrifice. And now, they were strangers. Jessica reached out a few times, her messages full of apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I never answered. There was nothing left to salvage. She had rolled the dice with my life, and lost. But I wasn't the same man I had been before. Her betrayal had hardened me. The way I saw the world shifted, and trust was no longer something I gave away freely. As painful as it was to let go, I knew deep down that I had made the right call. A few months later, I sold the house. The walls held too many ghosts, memories I couldn't bear to keep living alongside. I packed up and left town, determined to start fresh somewhere else. Starting over wasn't easy. 14 years of love, trust, and sacrifice don't just disappear overnight. But sometimes, walking away is the only way forward. A letter never sent. One night, long after the dust had settled, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, pen in hand. I wasn't sure why I did it, but the words poured out before I could stop them. Dear Lucas and Ava. I want you to know that everything I did because I loved you. You were my world, my pride and joy. And even though we may not share the same blood, you'll always be part of me. What happened between your mother and me is something you'll understand when you're older. For now, just know that I never stopped caring about you. I hope you grow into the amazing people I always believed you could be. And if you ever need me, I'll be there. Love. Dad. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into a drawer beside old bills and forgotten paperwork. Maybe one day, when they were older and ready to hear the truth, I'd send it to them. Or maybe that letter was just for me, a way to let go of the life I thought I had. Either way, I closed the drawer and rose to my feet, stepping over to the window. The city lights stretched out before me, flickering with quiet promise. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time in years, it was mine to walk. And for the first time in years, I felt free.